The massive doors of the Galactic Council chambers slid open with a soft hiss. Ambassador Zektar walked slowly into the circular room, his blue scales catching the light from the crystal dome above. His hands shook as he carried the datapad, containing information that would change everything around the chamber. Representatives from 43 different species sat in their designated seats. The Centauri with their long necks and silver skin, the peaceful Concord members with their flower-like heads that changed color with their moods, the Industrial Union delegates with their metal implants and mechanical arms. All of them were here for the same reason, to hear about the crisis that threatened everything they had built. Zektar reached the center of the chamber and placed his datapad on the speaker's podium. The device immediately connected to the main display system, filling the air above them with a three-dimensional map of the galaxy. Red markers showed the locations where the Crimson Horde had struck. There were too many red markers. "Honored delegates," Zektar began, his voice carrying clearly through the chamber's sound system. "Thank you for coming on such short notice. What I'm about to show you will be difficult to see, but you must understand the truth of our situation." The holographic display changed, showing a peaceful planet covered in green forests and blue oceans. Cities with elegant spires reached toward the sky. Ships moved between orbital stations in perfect harmony. It was the Vraxian colony world of New Hope, home to 12 million people. "This was New Hope 3 weeks ago," Zektar said. "It was our newest and most successful colony. The population was growing, trade was good, children were being born. Who had never known war?" The image shifted. Now the planet was gray and lifeless. The oceans had turned a sick brown color. The cities were gone, replaced by massive organic structures that looked like tumors growing from the planet's surface. Strange ships moved in the atmosphere, their hulls pulsing like living tissue. Several delegates gasped. Others made sounds of disgust or fear. The representative from the peaceful Concord turned completely white, which meant she was terrified. "This is New Hope now," Zektar continued. The Crimson Horde arrived without warning. Their bioships landed on the surface and began changing everything. The air became poison. The water became acid. Every living thing was either consumed or transformed into something else. The display showed more planets, more colonies, all suffering the same fate. The pattern was always the same. The Horde would arrive, overwhelm any defenses, and then remake the entire world to suit their needs. 12 colonies in 30 days, Zektar said, his voice growing louder. Over 50 million people dead or missing. Our fleets cannot stop them. Our weapons cannot harm them. Every time we develop a new defense, they adapt to overcome it within. Ours, Elder Morthic of the Centauri Alliance, stood up. His long neck allowed him to tower over the other delegates. "Ambassador Zektar, we are deeply sorry for your losses. But what exactly are you asking of us? The Vraxian Republic has the finest military in the galaxy. If you cannot stop these creatures, what hope do the rest of us have?" Zektar touched his datapad and the display changed again. This time it showed a battle between Vraxian warships and the Horde's bioships. The Vraxian vessels were sleek and beautiful, their hulls gleaming like polished metal. They moved in perfect formation, firing coordinated volleys of energy weapons. The bioships looked like nightmare creatures given form. Some resembled giant insects with wings made of living tissue. Others were long and serpentine, twisting through space like cosmic snakes. Their hulls were covered in what looked like scales, or armor plating, but these surfaces rippled and changed as the battle progressed. "Watch carefully," Zektar said. "Our plasma cannons are hitting their targets. The bioships are taking damage." Indeed, the first few shots from the Vraxian fleet tore holes in the bioships' hulls. Strange fluids leaked into space, and several of the creatures seemed to slow down. "But now watch what happens," Zektar continued. The bioships began to change. Their hulls grew thicker and more reflective. The next volley of plasma fire simply bounced off their surfaces, causing no damage at all. Within minutes, the creatures had adapted to become completely immune to plasma weapons. We switched to kinetic weapons, Zektar explained as the display showed the Vraxian ships launching solid projectiles, metal slugs fired at tremendous speed. These worked for a few minutes. The bio-ships shuddered under the impact of the metal projectiles, but then their hulls began to grow what looked like nets or webs. The next wave of kinetic weapons was caught in these structures and absorbed harmlessly. We tried particle beams, gravitational weapons, even experimental devices our scientists had been working on for decades, Zektar said. Nothing worked for more than a few minutes. They learn, they adapt. They become immune to everything we throw at them. The battle footage showed the inevitable result. The Vraxian fleet, having exhausted all their weapons, was forced to retreat. The bioships pursued them, moving faster than anything that size should be able to move. "This is impossible," whispered Delegate Yolana from the Peaceful Concord. "No species can adapt that quickly. It violates everything we know about biology and evolution." "Tell that to the 50 million dead," Zektar replied sharply. "Tell that to the colonies that no longer exist. Tell that to the refugee ships fleeing toward the core worlds with nowhere safe to go." The chamber fell silent. The weight of the crisis was finally sinking in for the delegates. If the Vraxian military could not stop the Horde, then no conventional force could. "What do you propose?" asked General Hickstar from the Industrial Union. "If our combined fleets cannot match the Horde's adaptability, what options remain?" Zektar took a deep breath. What he was about to suggest went against everything the Galactic Council stood for. We need help from outside the traditional alliance. Structure. We need soldiers who think differently than we do. We need warriors who can match the Horde's adaptability with their own. "You speak in riddles," said Elder Morthok. "What kind of soldiers are you referring to?" "Deathworlders," Zektar said quietly. The reaction was immediate and intense. Delegates jumped to their feet, shouting in a dozen different languages. The Peaceful Concord representative actually fainted. Others began arguing among themselves about the wisdom of such a desperate measure. "Order!" shouted Elder Morthok. "Order in the chamber." It took several minutes for the noise to die down. When it finally did, Delegate Yolana stood up slowly. "Ambassador, surely you cannot be serious. The Deathworld species are dangerous beyond measure. They are violent, unpredictable, and completely outside our understanding of civilized behavior." "They are also effective," Zektar replied. "They evolved on worlds so hostile that survival required constant adaptation. They are natural warriors trained by evolution itself to overcome any threat." "And where exactly would we find these Deathworlders?" asked General Hickstar. "The known Deathworld species are either extinct or so isolated that we have no contact with them." Zektar touched his datapad one more time. "I have already sent distress signals on all known frequencies, including the restricted channels. If any Deathworld species are listening, they will hear our call for help." The chamber erupted in argument again. Some delegates thought the plan was madness. Others were curious about what kind of response they might receive. A few were already making plans to evacuate their homeworlds before the situation got worse. Unknown. To the arguing delegates, their message had already been received. Deep in space, monitoring stations belonging to a species that had been watching the galaxy for decades picked up the transmission. The message was translated, analyzed, and forwarded to the appropriate authorities on Earth. In the command center of the United Earth Space Force, Captain Jake Morrison read the message for the third time. His weathered face showed no emotion. As he processed the information about the Crimson Horde and the desperate plea for help. "Lieutenant Carter," he called to his communications officer, "send a message to Fleet Command. Tell them we have a situation that requires immediate attention." "What kind of situation, sir?" Amy Carter asked. Morrison looked out at the stars visible through the command center's windows. Somewhere out there, an entire galactic civilization was under threat. They had called for help from anyone brave enough or crazy enough to fight. An enemy that adapted to every weapon used against it. "The kind we've been training for our entire lives," Morrison said. "Signal the fleet. We're going to introduce ourselves to the galaxy." Admiral Kexmore stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Vraxian Starguard, watching the sensor displays with growing worry. 3 days had passed since the Galactic Council meeting, and still no word from the Deathworld species. The Horde was moving closer to the core worlds with each passing hour. "Sir," called out his sensor officer, "we're getting strange readings from the outer system. Multiple contacts approaching at high speed." Kexmore moved to the tactical display, his blue scales shifting to a deeper color that showed his stress. The incoming ships were unlike anything in the Vraxian database. They were angular and sharp, built for war rather than exploration. Their hulls were dark gray, almost black, and they moved with a precision that made his experienced crew nervous. "Configuration unknown," reported his tactical officer. "Energy signatures are completely alien. They're not using any propulsion." "System we recognize? How many ships?" Kexmore asked. 12 large vessels, sir, and they're not slowing down." The unknown fleet continued its approach, making no attempt to communicate or identify themselves. Kexmore felt his throat sac tighten with fear. Had the Horde found them already? Were these new bioships with different designs? "All ships defensive." "Positions," he ordered. "Raise shields and prepare weapons." The Vraxian fleet moved into formation, their elegant ships creating a protective barrier around their homeworld. But even as they prepared for battle, Kexmore knew they were outmatched. If these were Horde vessels, the fight would be over quickly. "Sir," the communications officer suddenly spoke up, "we're receiving a transmission. It's on an old frequency, barely used anymore." "Put it through," Kexmore ordered. The main screen flickered, and suddenly they were looking at something that made the entire bridge crew take a step backward. The being on the screen was tall and pale, with strange hair covering the top of its head. Its eyes were small and forward-facing, like a predator's. When it spoke, its voice was calm and controlled, but there was something underneath that made Kexmore's scales crawl. "This is Captain Jake Morrison of the United Earthship Defiant. We received your distress call about the Crimson Horde. We're here to help." The bridge fell silent. Admiral Kexmore stared at the screen, trying to process what he was seeing. This creature looked nothing like any species in the galactic database. Its features were alien and disturbing, but there was intelligence in its eyes. You are Deathworlders?" Kexmore managed to ask. "We're from Earth, yes," Morrison replied. "We understand you have a problem with bioships that adapt to your weapons. We'd like to learn more about the situation." "How did you get here so quickly?" Kexmore asked. "We only sent the distress signal 3 days ago." Morrison smiled, and the expression was somehow both reassuring and terrifying. "We've been monitoring galactic communications for some time. When we heard your call for help, we came as fast as we could." "Monitoring our communications?" Kexmore's tactical officer whispered. "For how long?" "Long enough to know you're in serious trouble," Morrison answered, apparently having heard the whispered question. "Admiral, we need to talk." "May we come aboard?" Kexmore looked around at his crew. They were all staring at him with wide eyes, waiting for his decision. The smart thing would be to refuse, to keep these dangerous aliens at a distance. But the Horde was coming, and they needed any help they could get. "Permission granted," he said finally. "Docking Bay 3, we'll have an escort waiting." "Thank you, Admiral. We'll be there in 10 minutes." The screen went dark, leaving the bridge in stunned silence. Kexmore looked at his officers, seeing his own fear reflected in their faces. They were about to meet beings from a death world, creatures that had evolved to survive in conditions that would kill any civilized species. "Sir," his first officer said quietly, "are you sure about this? We know nothing about these humans." "They could be as dangerous as the Horde." "They could be," Kexmore agreed. "But right now, they're the only hope we have." 30 minutes later, Kexmore stood in Docking Bay 3 with a full honor guard. The human shuttle had landed with mechanical precision, its hull still hot from atmospheric entry. The airlock opened with a soft hiss, and 3 figures emerged. The first was the one they had spoken to on the bridge. Captain Morrison was tall and lean, with scars on his face and hands that spoke of many battles. His uniform was simple but practical, designed for function rather than appearance. When he walked, he moved like a hunter, each step careful and controlled. Behind him came a woman with short dark hair and eyes that seemed to see everything at once. She wore similar clothing, but Kexmore could see weapons built into her uniform. Not carried as tools, but integrated as part of her very being. The third human was massive, easily the largest sentient being Kexmore had ever seen. His shoulders were broad enough to fill a doorway, and his hands looked capable of crushing metal. But despite his size, he moved with the same careful grace as his companions. "Admiral Kexmore," Morrison said, extending his hand. "Thank you for allowing us aboard. I'm Jake Morrison, and these are my colleagues, Colonel Lisa Wade and Chief Sam Brooks." Kexmore hesitantly reached out to take the offered hand, surprised by the warmth of human skin and the controlled strength in Morrison's grip. "Captain Morrison, I must admit we are unprepared for this meeting. We hoped for help, but we never expected anyone to actually respond." "Most people don't," Lisa Wade said with a smile that was somehow both friendly and predatory. "But that's what we do. We show up when things get bad enough that people are willing to call the scary species for help." "Scary?" Kexmore asked, though he already knew the answer. "Admiral," Sam Brooks said in a voice that seemed to come from deep in his chest, "we evolved on a world that tried to kill us every single day. Everything on Earth is either a predator or prey, and we learned to be the biggest predators of all." Kexmore felt his scales shift to a paler shade of blue. "And you think this makes you capable of fighting the Horde?" "We think it makes us capable of understanding them," Morrison replied. "Admiral, may we see your tactical data? We need to know exactly what we're dealing with." An hour later, they were gathered in the main briefing room. The humans had studied every piece of information the Vraxians had about the Horde, watching battle footage with an intensity that made the alien officers uncomfortable. They asked questions that no one had thought to ask before. "Tell me about their breeding cycle," Morrison said. "Their what?" General Wexstar, the fleet's tactical commander, looked confused. "How do they reproduce? How do they create new bioships?" We don't know," Wexstar admitted. "We've been focused on fighting them, not studying them." Lisa Wade looked up from her analysis of the combat footage. "That's your first mistake. You've been treating them like ships when they're actually living creatures. Everything they do is based on biological imperatives. What difference does that make?" Kexmore asked. "All the difference in the world," Sam Brooks replied. "Machines follow programming, but living things follow instincts, and instincts can be predicted and exploited." Morrison stood up and walked to the tactical display. "Admiral, your people fight like civilized beings. Perfect formations, coordinated attacks, retreat when threatened. It's exactly what I would expect from an advanced species." "And that's bad?" General Wexstar asked. "Against the Horde, yes," Morrison replied. "They've been fighting civilized species for so long that they've learned to counter civilized tactics. Your predictability is what makes their adaptation so effective. So what do you suggest?" Kexmore asked. Wade smiled, and several Vraxian officers involuntarily stepped backward. "We suggest you stop fighting like prey and start fighting like predators." "We don't understand," Wexstar said. "You will," Morrison said grimly. "But first we need to see these bioships in action. Are there any Horde forces in this system?" "No," Kexmore replied. "The nearest concentration is 2 systems away in the Kepler region." "Good," Morrison said. "We'll go there." "Go there?" Kexmore's voice rose in alarm. "Captain, that system is completely overrun. There are hundreds of bioships there." "Perfect," Sam Brooks said with a grin that made the Vraxian officers huddle together. "The more the better." "You're insane," Wexstar whispered. "No," Morrison corrected. "We're human. There's a difference, but most people don't understand it until it's too late." Wade pulled up a star chart on the display. "Admiral, we're going to need your fastest ships and your best pilots, not your biggest ships or your most heavily armed ships." "Your fastest? Why?" Kexmore asked. "Because," Morrison said, "we're not going to fight the Horde the way they expect. We're going to hunt them." The briefing room fell silent. The concept was so alien to the Vraxian way of thinking that several officers looked physically ill. They were military beings trained to fight defensive battles and protect their territory. The idea of actively hunting an enemy was completely foreign to them. "Captain," Kexmore said carefully, "the Horde has destroyed every force sent against them. They adapt to every weapon, counter every tactic. How do you propose to hunt creatures that can change faster than we can react?" Morrison's smile was cold and predatory. "Admiral, you're thinking like prey again? The Horde adapts to counter-specific threats, but what happens when the threat keeps changing faster than they can adapt to it?" "I don't understand," Kexmore admitted. Asterisk. The combined human and Vraxian fleet dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Kepler system. Admiral Kexmore stared at his sensor displays in horror. The readings were even worse than their intelligence reports had suggested. "Admiral," his sensor officer reported, his voice shaking, "I count over 300 bioships in the inner system. They're clustered around what used to be Kepler Prime." On the main screen, the planet that had once been home to 8 million colonists was now unrecognizable. The blue and green world had turned a sickly brown color. Massive organic structures grew from its surface like tumors, reaching up into space. The bioships moved between these growths in complex patterns, feeding and growing larger. "My God," whispered General Wexstar, "they're breeding. The entire planet has become a nursery." Captain Morrison studied the display from his position on the Vraxian bridge. His human eyes saw details that the aliens missed. The way the bioships moved wasn't random at all. They were following specific flight paths, taking turns at the feeding stations, maintaining a careful hierarchy. "They're not just breeding," Morrison said quietly. "They're farming." "Farming?" Kexmore asked. "Using the planet as a resource to create more of themselves," Lisa Wade explained. She had been analyzing the bioship's energy signatures. "Look at the size variations. The smaller ones are newer, probably born in the last few weeks. The larger ones are mature, ready for combat." "This is even worse than we thought," Wexstar said. "If they can turn any planet into a breeding ground, they'll spread across the entire galaxy." "Not if we stop them here," Morrison replied. "Chief Brooks, what's your assessment?" Sam Brooks had been studying the organic structures on the planet's surface. "Those growths are connected, Captain. They're sharing resources through underground networks. If we could disrupt the network, the whole system would collapse." "How do we do that when there are 300 bioships protecting it?" "Kexmore asked. Morrison smiled, and the expression made the Vraxian officers nervous. "We don't fight all 300 at once. We make them come to us in small groups." "That's impossible," Wexstar protested. "They move as a coordinated swarm. They don't break formation." "They do if they think their nursery is threatened," Wade said. "Admiral, do you have any old ships? Something you were planning to scrap?" "We have a few older vessels in the reserve fleet," Kexmore replied, confused. "Why?" "Because we're going to use them as bait," Morrison explained. "We're going to make the Horde think we're attacking their breeding ground with a small force. They'll send just enough ships to deal with the threat." "And then?" Kexmore asked. "Then we spring the trap," Brooks said, with a grin that showed too many teeth. 2 hours later, 3 old Vraxian freighters approached the inner system. They had been modified with fake weapons and military transponders to look like a small attack force. The ships moved slowly and obviously, making no attempt to hide their approach. On the surface of Kepler Prime, the bioships immediately responded to the threat. 20 of the smaller vessels broke away from the feeding stations and moved to intercept the freighters. Just as Morrison had predicted, they sent exactly enough force to deal with what appeared to be a minor threat. "Phase 1 complete," Morrison announced from the bridge of the Defiant. "All ships, prepare for engagement." The human fleet had been hiding behind the system's asteroid belt, their ships powered down and running silent. Now they came to life. Moving with the sudden violence of predators striking at prey, the bioships detected the humans immediately and began to adapt. Their hulls shifted and changed, preparing to counter whatever weapons the newcomers might use. They had faced energy weapons before, and kinetic weapons, and even exotic particle beams. They were ready for anything, except the humans didn't use any weapons at all. What are they doing? One of the bioship pilots transmitted to its companions. The question was intercepted by human listening posts and translated in real time. The human ships were moving in strange patterns, weaving between the bioships without firing a shot. They were too close for the larger vessels to maneuver effectively, but too far away to ram. It was like watching a pack of wolves circling a herd of cattle. "They're confusing them," Wade observed from her position at the tactical station. "The bioships don't know what to adapt to if we don't attack." "Phase 2, Morrison ordered. Deploy the hounds." From the human ships, dozens of small drones launched into space. They were sleek and fast, darting between the bioships like angry insects. But instead of weapons, they carried speakers that began broadcasting a cacophony of sound. The noise was carefully designed to be as disturbing as possible to the bioship's sensory systems. Earth music, animal sounds, industrial noise, and human voices all mixed together in a chaos that overloaded the creature's ability to process information. "Sensory disruption successful?" Brooks reported. "The bioships are showing signs of distress. Their coordination is breaking down." Indeed, the bioships were beginning to behave erratically. Some tried to attack the drones, others attempted to flee back to the planet. A few even began attacking each other, their sensory systems so overwhelmed that they couldn't tell friend from foe. "Now," Morrison said quietly, the human fleet suddenly coordinated their attack, but not in any way the bioships expected. Instead of targeting the creatures themselves, they focused their fire on the space around them. Energy beams created walls of superheated plasma. Kinetic weapons filled the area with debris and shrapnel. The bioships found themselves trapped in a maze of hazards, forced to adapt to multiple threats simultaneously. Their hulls changed frantically, trying to counter the plasma, then the debris, then the energy fields. But every time they adapted to one threat, another appeared. "They can't keep up," Wade reported with satisfaction. "Their adaptation cycles are falling behind because they're trying to counter everything at once instead of focusing on one threat," Morrison explained to the watching Vraxians. "It's like trying to fight 10 different enemies with 10 different fighting styles." The bioship's confusion reached a critical point. Unable to adapt fast enough, they began to make mistakes. Some flew directly into the plasma walls. Others collided with debris fields. The survivors tried to retreat, but the humans had anticipated this. "Pursuit course," Morrison ordered. "Don't let them reach the planet." The human ships gave chase, herding the retreating bioships away from Kepler Prime. They used the same hit-and-run tactics, never staying in one place long enough for the creatures to adapt to their presence. "Sir," Lieutenant Carter reported from the communications station, "we're intercepting bioship transmissions. They're calling for help." "Good," Morrison said. "How many are responding?" 50 more ships breaking away from the planet," the sensor officer announced. "Perfect," Wade said. "They're reacting exactly as predicted." The reinforcing bioships arrived to find chaos. Their companions were scattered and confused, unable to coordinate their attacks. The human ships continued their strange tactics, never fighting the same way twice. "Admiral Kexmore," Morrison transmitted to the Vraxian flagship, "now would be a good time for your people to join the fight." The Vraxian fleet had been watching the battle in amazement. They had never seen anything like the humans' tactics. The bioships that had seemed so invincible were being systematically destroyed by an enemy that refused to fight by any known rules. "All ships," Kexmore ordered, "attack pattern Delta. Target the confused vessels." The Vraxian fleet moved in, using their traditional tactics against bioships that were too disoriented to adapt properly. For the first time in months, their weapons were effective. The creatures couldn't counter attacks they couldn't focus on. Within an hour, 70 bioships had been destroyed or disabled. The survivors fled back to the planet, their adaptation capabilities temporarily exhausted, but Morrison wasn't finished. "Chief Brooks," he said, "are you ready for Phase 3? "Ready, Captain," Brooks replied from the engineering section. "The resonance bombs are armed and targeted." "Resonance bombs?" General Wextar asked over the comm. "Weapons designed to disrupt organic structures," Wade explained. "We're going to attack the breeding networks on the planet's surface." The human ships moved closer to Kepler Prime, staying just outside the range of the remaining bioships. They launched a spread of unusual weapons that looked more like probes than bombs. The devices descended through the planet's atmosphere and buried themselves in the organic growths. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the entire surface began to vibrate. "The underground networks are resonating," Brooks reported. "The frequency is disrupting their cellular structure." On the planet below, the massive organic structures began to collapse. The feeding networks that connected them shattered like glass. The bioships orbiting the planet suddenly found themselves cut off from their resource supply. "Impossible," transmitted one of the bioship commanders. "How did they know about the resonance frequency?" Morrison smiled grimly. "Because we studied you. We learned how you work, how you think, how you live. And then we figured out how to kill you." The remaining bioships tried to counterattack, but they were operating on stored energy now. Without the constant supply from their breeding ground, they couldn't maintain their adaptation cycles indefinitely. "All ships," Morrison ordered, "finish them." News of the victory at Kepler spread across the galaxy faster than hyperspace communications. Within days, every species in the Galactic Council had heard about the humans and their impossible victory over the Crimson Horde. The reaction was mixed. Some were hopeful, others were terrified, and many were simply confused. Captain Morrison stood in the briefing room aboard the Vraxian flagship, watching the flood of communications that poured in from across the galaxy. Requests for help, demands for information, and even a few threats from species that considered humans too dangerous to be allowed to roam free. 47 different star systems have reported Horde activity, Admiral Kexmore said as he reviewed the latest intelligence reports. "They're all asking for human assistance." "And what did you tell them?" Morrison asked. "That we would forward their requests to you," Kexmore replied. "The decision is yours to make." Morrison nodded slowly. The humans had proven they could fight the Horde, but winning one battle was different from winning a war. The bioships were spread across dozens of star systems, and each group would learn from the defeat at Kepler. "They'll adapt," Lisa Wade said from her position at the tactical display. "The Horde ships and other systems will have received data about our attack methods. They'll be ready for us next time." "Good," Morrison said, surprising the Vraxian officers. "That's exactly what we want." "You want them to adapt to your tactics?" General Wextar asked in confusion. "We want them to think they've adapted," Sam Brooks corrected. "The key to fighting adaptive enemies is staying one step ahead of their learning curve." Morrison walked to the star chart that showed Horde positions across the galaxy. "Admiral, how many species are capable of mounting military operations against the Horde?" "Perhaps a dozen," Kexmore replied. "But they're all afraid to act after seeing what happened to our forces." "Then it's time to change that," Morrison said. "We're going to teach them how to fight." "Teach them?" Wextar looked alarmed. "Captain, with respect, your methods are extremely difficult to understand. How can you teach other species to fight like humans?" "We don't teach them to fight like humans," Wade explained. "We teach them to think like hunters instead of prey." Over the next week, human advisors spread out across the galaxy. Captain Morrison himself went to the Centauri home system, where their long-necked, peaceful species had been preparing to evacuate their colonies rather than fight the approaching Horde. Elder Morthak met Morrison at the orbital station above Centauri Prime. The alien leader was clearly nervous, his neck swaying back and forth in distress. "Captain Morrison, we are grateful for your offer of assistance, but I must tell you that the Centauri are not a warrior species. We have always believed in peaceful solutions to conflicts." "I understand," Morrison replied calmly. "But sometimes peace requires the ability to defend it." They moved to the Centauri Military Command Center, where Admiral Veltanus was studying sensor reports of the approaching Horde fleet. 20 bioships were moving through the outer system, adapting their hulls as they encountered the automated defense platforms. "They've already learned to counter our energy weapons," Veltanus reported. "The outer defenses are useless." Morrison studied the tactical display with interest. "Admiral, what's the one thing the Centauri do better than any other species?" "I don't understand the question," Veltanus replied. "Your people are known for what?" Morrison prompted. "Communication," Elder Morthuk said slowly. "The Centauri have the most advanced communication networks in the galaxy." "Exactly," Morrison said. "So we use that." "The Horde adapts to physical threats, but what about information warfare?" "Information warfare?" Veltanus asked. Morrison smiled. "The bioships communicate with each other to share adaptation data. What happens if we disrupt those communications? Or better yet, what if we feed them false information?" Meanwhile, in the vegan system, Colonel Wade was working with the Insectoid Vegan Collective. The ant-like aliens were natural coordinators, able to work together with perfect efficiency. But they had been devastated by the Horde because their predictable coordination made them easy targets. "Your mistake is thinking coordination means uniformity," Wade explained to Queen Hickstal and her warrior drones. "You all move the same way, attack the same way, think the same way. The Horde adapts to one of you, they adapt to all of you." "But coordination is our strength," Queen Hickstal protested. "Without it, we are just individuals." "Coordination doesn't have to mean identical behavior," Wade said. "Watch this." She activated a holographic display showing Earth's military history. The images showed human soldiers working together, but each unit had different roles, different weapons, different tactics. "Each group specializes in something different," Wade explained. "When one approach fails, another takes over. The enemy can't adapt to everything at once." "But how do we implement such chaos?" one of the warrior drones asked. "It's not chaos," Wade corrected. "It's controlled diversity. You coordinate the strategy, but you let each unit execute it in their own way." In another system, Chief Brooks was working with the Industrial Union, helping them understand how to use their technological advantages against an enemy that adapted to technology. "Your problem is that you're trying to build better weapons," Brooks explained to Director Zaxhorn as they stood in a massive factory complex. "But the Horde adapts to any weapon you build." "Then how do we fight them?" Zaxhorn asked, his mechanical arms clicking with frustration. "You don't build better weapons," Brooks said. "You build different weapons. Weapons that work once and then get thrown away." "That's incredibly wasteful," Zaxhorn protested. "Is it more wasteful than losing entire star systems?" Brooks asked. "The key is to make weapons so simple and cheap that you can afford to use them once and discard them." He showed Zaxhorn designs for disposable weapons, simple chemical explosives, basic kinetic launchers, even primitive projectile weapons. Each one was designed to be effective exactly once before being abandoned. "The Horde will adapt to each weapon," Brooks explained, "but by then you're already using something completely different." Back on the Vraxian flagship, Morrison received reports from his advisors across the galaxy. The various species were slowly beginning to understand the human approach to warfare, but implementing it was proving difficult. "The Peaceful Concord refuses to consider any military action," Lieutenant Carter reported. "They're asking if there's a diplomatic solution to the Horde problem. The Crystalline Federation wants to know if we can guarantee their safety before they commit any forces," added the communications officer. Morrison sighed. "What about the species that are actually willing to fight?" "The Vraxians, Centauri, Vegans, and Industrial Union are all implementing the new tactics," Carter replied. "But they're struggling with the concept of controlled chaos." "They'll learn," Morrison said, "or they'll die. Either way, the problem solves itself." Admiral Kexmore entered the briefing room at that moment, carrying urgent reports. "Captain, we're receiving distress signals from the Altair system. A major Horde fleet is attacking the industrial colonies there." Morrison studied the incoming data. "How major?" "Over 200 bioships," Kexmore replied. It's one of their largest fleets. Good, Morrison said, surprising the Vraxian admiral. Signal all allied fleets. It's time for the final exam. Final exam? Kexmore asked. We've been teaching everyone how to fight the Horde individually, Morrison explained. Now we need to see if they can work together. Within hours, the largest fleet in galactic history was assembling near the Altair system. Vraxian warships flew alongside Centauri. Communication vessels, vegan swarm fighters, and Industrial Union factory ships. At the center of it all, the human fleet maintained coordination between the diverse allies. Captain, Wade reported from the tactical station. The Horde fleet at Altair has been monitoring our communications. They know we're coming. Of course. They do, Morrison said. They've been adapting to our previous tactics. By now, they think they understand how humans fight. Don't they? General Wexstar asked. Morrison's smile was cold and predatory. They understand how we fought at Kepler. But we've been learning too. The difference is, we learn faster than they adapt. On the main screen, the massive bioship fleet came into view. The creatures had indeed adapted. Their hulls now configured to counter the sonic attacks, resonance weapons, and confusion tactics the humans had used before. All ships, Morrison announced to the combined fleet. Ignore everything we taught you. Today we improvise. The Allied fleet struck with a combination of tactics that had never been tried before. Centauri ships used their communication arrays to create false targeting data. Vegan swarms attacked in patterns that seemed random but followed hidden mathematical principles. Industrial Union vessels deployed weapons that were literally built. During the battle and used once before being discarded, the humans coordinated it all, but they also added their own surprise, tactics they had never used before. Weapons they had kept in reserve, strategies that even their allies didn't know about. The Horde tried to adapt. But there was too much chaos, too much diversity, too much controlled randomness. For every tactic they countered, 3 new ones appeared. Their adaptation cycles couldn't keep up with the creative destruction the Allied fleet unleashed when the battle was over. 6 months after the great victory at Altair, the Galactic Council chambers were fuller than they had ever been. Representatives from every known species had gathered to discuss what many were calling the most important decision in galactic history. The question was simple: what to do about the humans? Ambassador Zektar stood at his usual place, but now he wore the golden sash of a war hero. His blue scales had taken on a healthier shine, and his voice carried new confidence. Honored delegates, we gather today to address the human question. In 6 months, they have driven the Crimson Horde from 47 star systems. The threat that nearly destroyed our civilization has been contained. A murmur of agreement ran through the chamber. The victories were undeniable. Across the galaxy, colonies that had been abandoned were being resettled. Trade routes that had been closed for years were opening again. The bioships that had seemed unstoppable were now fleeing toward the outer rim of the galaxy. However, Zektar continued, his voice growing more serious, we must now face the reality of what we have unleashed. The humans have proven themselves to be the most effective military force in galactic history. The question before us is whether such beings can be trusted as members of our community. Elder Morthic of the Centauri Alliance rose slowly. His long neck swayed with nervousness as he spoke. The humans saved my people. Without their intervention, the Centauri colonies would have been consumed by the Horde, but I must admit their methods troubled us deeply. How so? Asked General Hickstar from the Industrial Union. They think like predators, Morthak replied. Everything they do is calculated to destroy their enemies as efficiently as possible. They show no mercy, no hesitation, no doubt. How do we coexist with beings who view violence as simply another tool? The same way we coexist with any dangerous species, said Queen Hickstal of the Vegan Collective. We respect their power and ensure our interests align with theirs. But what happens when our interests don't align? Asked Delegate Yolana from the Peaceful Concord. What happens when these predators decide we are the threat? The chamber erupted in heated discussion. Some delegates praised the humans as saviors. Others worried about the long-term implications of having such dangerous allies. A few suggested that humanity should be contained or monitored to prevent them from becoming a threat themselves. "Order!" shouted Elder Morthok. "We have invited Captain Morrison to address the council. Perhaps he can answer our concerns directly." The main doors of the chamber opened, and Captain Jake Morrison walked in with Colonel Lisa Wade in chief. Sam Brooks. The three humans moved with their usual predatory grace, seemingly unaware of the fear and tension their presence created among the assembled delegates. Morrison approached the speaker's podium with calm confidence. His weathered face showed no emotion as he looked out at the hundreds of alien representatives watching him with mixtures of gratitude and terror. "Honored delegates," Morrison began, his voice carrying clearly through the chamber, "I understand. You have concerns about humanity's place in the galactic community. I'm here to address those concerns as honestly as possible." "Captain Morrison," Elder Morthok said carefully, "we are grateful for your species' intervention against the Horde, but many of us are troubled by your methods. You fight with a brutality that seems to go against everything we consider civilized." Morrison nodded slowly. "You're right, we do fight brutally. We fight to win, completely and permanently. We don't believe in half measures when lives are at stake." "But where does it end?" Delegate Yolana asked, her voice shaking. "If you're willing to use such methods against the Horde, what's to stop you from using them against us?" "Because you're not trying to exterminate entire species," Wade said simply. "We only fight like that against enemies who threaten innocent people. The Horde was committing genocide. That required a genocidal response." "And if we disagreed with?" "You on some political matter?" pressed General Hickstar. "If our interests conflicted with yours?" Then we'd negotiate," Brooks replied. "We'd argue, debate, maybe shout at each other. But we wouldn't try to wipe you out unless you tried to wipe us out first. How can we be sure of that?" asked Queen Hickstal. Morrison stepped forward. "Because we've already proven it. We've been monitoring galactic communications for decades. We knew about your wars, your conflicts, your political disputes. We never intervened because they weren't our business." "You've been watching us for decades?" Ambassador Zektar asked in surprise. "Of course we have," Morrison replied. "We wanted to understand the galactic community before making contact. We knew we were different, possibly dangerous to you. We waited until you actually needed our help before revealing ourselves." "And now?" Elder Morthok asked. "What do you want from us?" Morrison looked around the chamber, meeting the eyes of delegates from dozens of species. "We want to be part of the community we help save. We want to trade with you, learn from you, maybe even become friends with some of you. But we understand." "If that's not possible, what do you mean?" Zektar asked. "We know what we are," Wade said quietly. "We're predators. We evolved to hunt and kill and survive in conditions that would destroy most species. We can't change that, and we wouldn't want to even if we could. But we can control it," Morrison added. "We can choose when to use our abilities and when to hold back. The question is whether you trust us to make those choices responsibly." The chamber fell silent. The weight of the decision was enormous. Accepting humanity into the galactic community would mean living alongside the most dangerous species any of them had ever encountered. Rejecting them might mean making enemies of the beings who had just saved their civilization. "Captain, Elder," Morthok said finally, "what guarantees can you offer that humanity will not become a threat to peaceful species?" Morrison smiled, and for once the expression didn't seem predatory. "The same guarantee you offer each other. Our word backed by our actions. We've had the power to conquer this galaxy for months now. Instead, we've spent that time teaching you how to defend yourselves. But what about the future?" Yolana asked. "What happens when humanity grows stronger, when you have more ships, more weapons? Then you'll be even safer," Brooks said. "Because we'll still be on your side." "Why?" Queen Hickstal asked. "Why should we believe you'll always be on our side?" Morrison's expression grew serious. "Because that's who we are. Humans protect others, it's what we do. We spent our entire evolutionary history taking care of the weak, defending our communities, sacrificing ourselves for strangers. That doesn't change, just because we've reached the stars. Ambassador Zektar stood up. Captain Morrison, would humanity be willing to accept certain restrictions on military expansion? Monitoring of your fleet movements? Regular inspections to ensure you're not developing weapons of mass destruction? No, Morrison said firmly, and the chamber tensed. We won't accept being treated like criminals for having the ability to defend ourselves and others, but we will agree to transparency. You can monitor our communications, observe our military exercises, even station observers on our ships. We have nothing to hide. And if another crisis arises, General Hickstar asked, another threat like the Horde? Then you call us, Wade said, and we come running just like we did this time. Even if we vote against your membership today? Elder Morthok asked. Even then, Morrison confirmed. Because helping people isn't something we do for rewards. It's something we do because it's right. The chamber erupted in discussion again. For hours, delegates debated and argued about the human question. Some species threatened to leave the council if humanity was admitted. Others threatened to leave if they were rejected. Finally, Ambassador Zektar called for order. We will now vote on the question of human membership in the Galactic Council, all in favor. Lights began appearing on the voting board. Green for yes, red for no. The count was close, closer than anyone had expected. Species that had been saved by human intervention voted yes. Those that had never faced the Horde voted no. The middle ground species wavered when the final count appeared. The chamber fell silent. The vote was 127 in favor, 126 against, with 15 abstentions. By a margin of 1 vote, Zektar announced, humanity is accepted as a member of the Galactic Council. Morrison nodded calmly, as if he had expected this result. Thank you for your trust. We won't disappoint you. See that you don't, Elder. Morthok said quietly. The galaxy will be watching. As the human delegation left the chamber, mixed reactions followed them. Some delegates applauded their new allies. Others looked terrified at what they had just done. All of them knew that the galaxy had changed forever outside the chamber. Morrison paused to look back at the building where galactic policy was made. Think we'll fit in? Wade asked. Morrison smiled. Eventually. Give them time to get used to us. And if they don't? Brooks asked. Then they'll keep protecting them anyway, Morrison replied. Because that's what humans do. Above them, the stars shone down on a galaxy that was safer than it had been in centuries. The predators had been welcomed into the fold, and the age of humanity among the stars had truly begun.